Hi, I'm Mark Lawson, president of the ECS Publishing Group, and we are very pleased today to have a chance to speak with award-winning Stacy Garrop, the composer of the newest NCCO piece. The piece is entitled By Silver Pinions, and we're so pleased to have a chance to talk with you. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you, Mark, and it's such a pleasure to be talking with you today. And I look forward to the day that we can all get back together in person and hold the NCCO conference live.
I am looking forward to that as well. So for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I grew up in California, and I was one of these people who didn't, I was very naive as a kid. I didn't know that people wrote music. So it wasn't until I was in marching band. I was actually in choirs ever since the third grade. And then I got into marching band, and I was taking a music theory class where the teacher said, go home and write a piece of music. And I swear, if he had not said those words, we would not be having this conversation right now. It's as simple as that. From that moment on, a direct line of like, well, I love composing. I can't stop composing. I just wrote piece after piece. I got my degrees back in the 80s and 90s at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, then University of Chicago, and I finished at Indiana University. I then taught for 16 years at Roosevelt University in Chicago, which is how I ended up in the Chicago area. And then in 2016, I quit to go freelance. And I've been a freelance composer ever since.
So I know you write in many different genres. Do you have a preferred genre, or how much time do you spend with choral music in particular?
I kind of feel like whatever piece I'm writing right at that moment, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And it's like, I know that sounds a little silly, but it's true. When I'm writing saxophone music, I'm all about the saxophones. And when I'm writing choir music or opera or orchestra, the real reason I quit my job at Roosevelt was because I really wanted to make the pivot into opera. And that's not an area you can easily get into if you're teaching full time. So I actually am going to be writing my second opera soon. But in addition to that, I still make sure I divide up my time and compose for all these different genres as commissions come up. So it usually ends up being about a choir piece or two a year. In the last, ever since I wrote Thy Silver Pinions, and I think I wrote that probably about a year ago. Yeah, it was sometime about a year ago. I wrote a piece for the Crossing called In a House Besieged that they will be premiering in March on tour. It's with an organ. And then I also wrote Apollo's Lyre, which is for the Apollo Chorus. They will be premiering it at the ACDA Midwest Convention in February. And then I'm also doing a little vocal quartet of a piece called The Solitude of Stars. This was a big pandemic project I did where I keep reorchestrating the same piece for different configurations. And this is the first all choral version of that. And then lastly, I just got a commission from Ed Fraser Davis, who is starting a new choir here in Chicago called Vox Venti, and I will be their first commissioned composer.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, one of the things on your website that I noticed was that you kind of described yourself as enjoying lyric storytelling. I thought that was an interesting line. How would you describe your writing? How would you describe your style?
Well, I definitely feel drawn to narrative. And this is probably because when I was a little girl, my parents took me to see West Side Story. And the minute I heard Tony open his mouth and sing "Something's Coming," I was really smitten. And then watching, Tony die at the end, I don't think I'm giving anything away at this point. Hopefully we've all seen West Side Story in the last, 40 years. But it really struck me that we can have a lot of power to tell stories through music. And that's why I wanted to, as I began writing pieces in school, I wasn't really drawn to what I was doing. But the minute I began assigning a story, even if it's not a story that the audience is aware of, that made the whole experience more meaningful to me. And the other thing that this ties in with is that there's many musical parameters we can use when we shape music. Some people use a lot of pitch and rhythm or serialism and all that. For me, it's really about form and tension and relaxation. So if a piece does not have a convincing or strong form, even if that form is a straight line, you won't know what to do with the tension and relaxation to carry out that form. So for me, the basis of every piece is to start with the form. And then after I figure out what it's trying to do, then I can start, and that's the background level, then I can start to apply the foreground levels.
That's great. And it's very applicable to this piece. And we'll talk about that in a second. Let's kind of dive into this a little bit, this commission. It's a very interesting text that you've put together of two well-known poets. So talk about the commission itself and then how you chose these particular texts.
Right. When Dominic DeOrio gave me this, he sent me an email asking if I would like to be their first commission composer for this particular NCCO grant. I was really thrilled, and he left the topic open to me. And in looking at what was going on in the world at that moment, we had the American election going on. We still weren't quite on the verge of getting the vaccines yet. We didn't know quite when that was about to start. And with all the other uncertainty going on with George Floyd and his murder, it was just, there was so much uncertainty that I kept feeling like the word that came to my mind was hope, that I needed to know that there was a little bit of hope somewhere along the line, that maybe things are going to start to, with enough people working on different problems, we're going to start to get further on the pandemic, or racial injustice, or the presidential election will somehow come to a conclusion. So I think for me, that's where I began researching poems about hope. And what really struck me is whenever I do this research, I look at a lot of different poems, and I like keep a sheet going of all the different poems. And I found in the Dickinson, as well as in the Keats, this wonderful imagery of hope as a bird. And I kept thinking, well, should I use more of the Keats? Should I use less of the Dickinson? But then it really occurred to me, all I really need from the Keats are these two lines of sweet hope, ethereal balm upon me shed, and wave thy silver pinions o'er my head. And he keeps having this refrain come back at the end of his verses anyway, with slight alterations. But then I realized, what if I just use Dickinson's poem and then have Keats's poem become that refrain? And it seemed to work really well. The only thing that I wanted to add as well to this is I wanted to start with this section. If the formal structure is quite simple, it's an introduction that has no text, it's just vowel sounds. And that represents the hope. And then we have these alterations of the Dickinson text, the Keats, Dickinson Keats, which is A, B, A, B. And then we end with an outro, which is really the intro, but with a bird solo on top of it. So it comes back, the whole beginning comes back, but this time we hear something new with the sound of hope represented by the bird.
So why don't I go ahead and share my screen and bring this up. We start out, and you do a nice job of describing this in the program notes, but here's the text that you've been dealing with on these two particular texts. And so then here's the introduction you were talking about. You have this in very distinct sections, I think. So you want to talk about how that came up?
Yeah, the challenge was I knew pretty early on that I wanted the intro and the outro to match, but I needed to leave some headroom for the soloist to come in on top at the end. I also wanted to have there be enough sound going on that there wouldn't be any pause in the music until pretty much we're right where you are right now at measure 13, where we have the fermata on the double bar. There's actually one spot right above it in measure 8 where there is a breath, where there is no sound, but I'm always very, very cognizant of what kind of space are we leaving? Silence is just as important of a parameter as form and tension and notes and everything else. So when I have a silence, it's usually important, or there's a reason for it when you're seeing these dynamics increase. So at measure 13, that's the end of this introduction. And then we go into the Dickinson poem. Now, what's so funny about this is when I sang in choirs ever since 3rd grade, I was always an alto. And being an alto, you start to have a lot of compassion for those inner voices that don't get a lot of great lines necessarily. Yes. So if you look, you'll see that the altos here are kind of featured because the other 3 voices are doing something in lockstep, and the altos are the ones that are offset. So I do try to make sure that every piece has a little bit of what I call the alto's revenge, so that they always have a chance to be heard.
I had noticed that, but I didn't know there was a reason. So very nice to point that out.
Yeah, and the idea here is that the hope itself, the poem of Dickinson, it's a little more straightforward, a little like, here we are down in the trenches. We can't quite see the hope yet. So you'll see that the ranges are lower, the rhythms are a lot thinner, the harmonies are a lot thinner, the ranges are a lot lower. But then when we get over to the Keats sections, which are marked with surging hope. This is the first one. Oops, is it? I'm sorry.
Yes, measure 33, I think.
Yes. That you'll see that whenever you see the with surging hope, this is where now I want the tension and momentum to rise so that we can have a sense that this hope is coming and we can see it. And you can see that the rhythms have gotten a lot more lively, a lot more third motion of the triplet motion, and filling in like the wave by Silver, you see all the extra notes per syllable. So I really wanted there to be a striking difference between those two sections. Then when we get to the next A section, we're back to the forlorn aching. And that I always make it clear, these sections, that you know which part, which section you're singing. This is the Dickinson again. You see that now the alto's revenge has stopped. It's 2 + 2, I call it, so that the inner voices are working together, the outer voices are working together. But it's back to the more simple type of text setting. So we're really focusing on those that darker color, lower part of the range. But what I wanted to do with the next surging hope section on page 10 is I wanted it to kind of continue from where the last sweet hope stopped. So it's not repeating where it picked up the first time, or the first time we heard the sweet hope, but it's a continuation of that sweet hope. So it's almost like if you knocked out this middle section, this second Dickinson section, you'll see that there's more of just a rising ascent in those two. And that's where I'm talking about the formal structure. For me, everything is aimed for this sweet hope, this second section. And you'll see it really crests on page 12. When we get to wave thy silver pen, and I know it's not the best syllable for this, but it should be a beautiful moment when in measure 75, everybody is holding the silver. So we'll have that nice crest of a moment. And then from there, it increases yet again. And that's something I really like to play with at the top of 13 is when you get to what you think is the climax, can you then push it up even further? So this is a good example right here on page 13, where we thought we had already hit maybe the plateau, but I really saved this moment for head a little bit later. And the vowel sound is definitely a better color than the silver for having this nice big moment. From there, I wanted to have this last reaching for hope section, and that's where we now see the bird descant begin. And this one was interesting. I actually had to go back and rewrite the beginning a little bit because I did want to have the other voices replicate what they did exactly in the introduction. But when I began writing this out, I had actually had the sopranos up a little bit higher and then realized they were going to conflict with the bird. So all their material got lowered, which is why you see the soprano so low, to make sure that that soprano bird really comes out clearly. The last thing is I wanted to end, I began doing something during the pandemic with the Solitude of Stars piece I referenced before. It ends with people usually sighing, which actually became a problem with masks on. We've had to experiment with different things to do with that. But I wanted some last moment to be different from everything that happened before. And having people whisper the word hope, and the men are humming actually below that. So if you go down a little bit further on the page, you can see that the men are humming. I thought that would be a beautiful sound, something unique to end the piece.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing the performance of this whenever we can get around to it. It's so unfortunate we had to cancel in Atlanta, but I'm hoping that this will make its way into NCCO members' mailboxes before very long. So thank you for taking time to share this with us, and thank you for your contribution. It's actually wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you, Mark. And I am just so thrilled that you put this into the catalog, and I can't wait to hear people trying to bring this bird to life.
And I would encourage those of you watching to feel free to look at her website, and I think you'll find quite a few things of interest there. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.